All right, guys, so let's talk about drawing through the shape today. This was a common problem that when I was looking at everybody's work that people were experiencing, and I know exactly what part of the problem is here, so I'm going to zoom in and pick a segment here. Hold on, got to turn the touch off and get this centered here. Okay, so, all right, so here was the key problem. Let me sort of go over this really quickly with you guys, and give me just a second here. Let me turn down the grid just a teeny bit here for you. There you go. Okay, let me label this real fast. Grid. Okay, so a lot of you guys had a box drawn correctly in perspective, like so. I'm just going to rough this out really quick here. Let's see here, boom, and receive this part back here. Okay, let me erase this little line. Right, hold on, guys. I made a mistake right there. I need to back up. One more time. I drew on the, I need to lock the grid real quick. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Now I'm on the right layer and we'll be ready to go here. Okay, so a lot of you guys had this, which was drawn correctly. You had a box. So pretend this right now is part of the thorax of your creature. It's like part of the midsection, let's say, okay, of your insect that we're working on. And so what the problem was is a lot of you guys came over like right here and you had a leg that was connected. So I'm going to come in right here, and I'm just going to draw a leg down. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, I'm going to just put a leg like this. Get that leg in there like this. I'm just going to be really simple with it. Some of you guys had like, no offense, Michelle, but you had like triangles, and you had all these hardcore shapes. Just simplify it into cubes. If you want to taper it or something, that's totally fine. If you want to put, I told people don't work on ellipses right now, but if you just want to put a little cylinder and you can draw through the shape and you can use that as a kneecap, that's totally fine, okay? But the one thing that some people sort of forgot about was understanding where the feet hit the ground plane. So I thought I'd talk about that because on a couple sketches that I saw, okay, people actually had the midsection of the body like into the ground and then they wouldn't be able to walk. Does that make sense? Because the legs weren't down enough. So if I were to come over here, this is how you determine where the ground plane is. Right now, technically, I don't know where that shape is if it's floating. I have to come in here with a little red dotted line from the center axis and drop it. And if I decide, hey, this is going to end, boom, right there, okay, a really easy way to figure out where the feet hit is to draw in another color that shape of that square down on the ground where it's hitting. So look, I'm going to do that really quick. I decided it's going to hit right there. I can decide if it's going to hit right here and I can draw a line, or I can decide if it's going to hit right here. That's completely up to me. However, whatever decision I make between here and here, it's going to affect the length of the leg and where that lands. And I'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to decide that this is going to be the overall length right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here, I'm going to make these little marks. Okay, I'm going to find out exactly where the edges end. So I just brought down that corner. And I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to just do that for everything else. I'm going to recede that line back, okay, where that line hits right here. All right, I now have to draw through the shape. I have that back line on the back there, which pretty much lines up about there. So once I come over here and I recede this line back, let me get the perspective right. It goes right about there. And then once I take this and recede it back, that's going to hit right about there. Okay, so if my thickness is off, it's just the Cintiq pen, but you get the idea there, right? That really helps, and that's something I should have shown you before because a lot of people weren't getting that at all. They didn't understand, and this is a great way a lot of artists do this all the time, is we put that down there and then we sort of go like this, and we put a couple lines across, indicating that that's the shadow for us. Because now we have a definite understanding of where the shadow plane is hitting the ground, right? So by doing that now, if I came in here and if I did this, okay, so this is what a lot of you did then by accident. You did that, okay? Let me explain why that's incorrect, why that's off. Is it, if you see where this leg is right here, where it lines up there, if I drop a dotted line down to here and I hit that mark right there, then I come back over to my vanishing point and I bring that line out. Okay, that's where my leg should be hitting. Do you understand how I figured that out? Okay, so depending on the insect's height, will dictate where the leg is hitting. Okay, so you get to determine the height of the bug. Once you determine that and figure out its relationship from here to here, we can call that A if you want. That's the height relationship. By understanding that height relationship and then drawing basically this shape right here, okay, drawing through the shape and figuring out where the shape is, sort of lining up right here, that's going to determine where that shadow height is. Okay, so when someone had a leg like this, I looked at it and I'm like, totally off. Okay, this leg needs to come back here and it would need to end right about here. So if I had that like this, it has to end right there. Okay, that's that leg correctly drawn in perspective. Okay, so now the important part then is what is on the other side. So the majority of you guys were faking it, and I was nailing you on it because I could see it being fake. Okay, but this is how you figure this out. So this is my fault because I didn't really show you part of this. I drew through the other side, but I didn't show you the shadow part on the ground because that's key. That is the first step. By figuring out the height relationship of your insect or your mech above the ground, you now understand where the ground plane is, and now you can come back and draw lines going across. Okay, so then a lot of you came over and you did the cheesy eyeball. Okay, and here's the cheesy eyeballs. You came over here and you said like that. Okay, that's the cheesy eyeball. That's not right. This is how I know it's not right, is because I could come over here now, and if I recede this line right here, remember where this leg was right here? If I recede that dotted line back in this direction, that leg is going to be hitting on that line. See how I figure that out? Okay, here's another way I can figure it out, right? The perspective is constant in everything that I'm doing right now. So what I could do is, see how I drop this line down to here? Right here? I could then just recede this line back towards the vanishing point like this, and then come up. And now I know, this is how I figure out where that leg is going to be on the other side. Okay, so now I know it's there. Let me do the other side here. So I know the exact thickness. Now I need to know the height. Well, that's easy. Here, let me do this one in orange for you. Okay, so for the height, I just take the height there, I bring it to there, and then I bring the height back to here, then I recede that height back across. The back, oops, sorry, that's my pen slipping on the Cintiq. Let me undo there. Sorry about that. So once I bring that height back like that, boom, that's the height of that leg. And I was a little off there. The ruler slipped a little bit. Not only drawing on a Cintiq, but I'm at an angle, and I could feel it slide sometimes. Okay, but so you get the point. That's how I draw correctly through the shape, right? Huh?
The height again.
The height? So the height, look, here's the height right here, right? So all I have to do is make a dotted line, recede that back to here, and then recede that back to the other corner, and then come back to the vanishing point that goes this way. So we'll call this one VP2 that's way out there, VP1, so I can be more specific, okay? All right, because we can't see the vanishing points right now. I zoomed in. Okay, so I take this height and I go back to VP2. Then I hit that mark right here on the side. And I take that mark and I recede that back to the back corner, drawing through the shape towards VP1. And then I come back from VP2 and take that and then take it and go that way. And where it hits the top of those lines that I already measured, that's the height. So now I've figured out where the height of that exact square that's going to be there. Okay? Now all I have to do is to know exactly where the leg is. And now give me a second. I'm going to erase some of this orange so it doesn't get too confusing. Because I know this is where it starts to get a little confusing. And then I have to redraw the blue on there real quick. Okay, give me a second. Okay, one sec, guys. There. Okay, now I have to, I'm going to do this on another layer so I can turn it off. Now I need to figure out exactly where this leg is on the other side, right? Let me show you a really quick way that I can figure that out, okay? I'm going to come in here. I'm going to do this in a dark brown so you can see it, okay? I know where the center line is, right? We all know how to figure that out just by crossing it, putting an X from corner to corner. Now that I know where that center line is, In a second, my sketch was off there. Okay. If I recede that center line back to VP2 right there, watch me do it. There. Receded there, right? See how I receded this red line back here? Where that line hits right here, I'm going to draw a line down. Boom. I'm going to draw a line from here to that leg. Okay? And come up right here and then recede. I'm basically drawing that leg existing in a square. And you know why I'm doing that? Because now I'm going to do proportional division through that leg, and I'll know exactly where the other leg ends. Okay? Did I lose anybody on that? No. So now I'm going to cross real quick. I just threw my pen out of my hand. Sorry. Here we go. I'm going to find that middle section. It's right there. I'm going to connect. Okay? So look, I know that red line is consistent. It goes like that, right? So I'm going to connect now from that top corner through this little point here. And, oh, sorry. Hold on, let me do that. Let me go this way. There we go. And it hits right there. So you see how I just did that? I figured out that if this leg connects out and drops there, now I know exactly where this foot's going to hit here. Now I just need to measure across. What do I need to know? I need to know the height of this one right here. Do you see that? I'm going to take that height and I'm going to bring it across right there. Boom. I'm going to measure now the cylinder height. Okay? So I know that it's going to hit right here exactly. Boom. It's going to come up here. Okay? And then it's going to recede back. And I can even figure out the thickness now. I can measure the thickness from here and draw another line back like that. See that? And now where that point hits right there, that's the thickness. Okay? Did I confuse anybody? Okay, so now I just take all these measurements. Look at the marks that I have. Okay? So look at all the marks that I have. I could even, if I wanted to, now that I know the center line, if I wanted to figure out that exact angle right there. So do you see how I found the center line? If I wanted to, I could take this angle right here, where that connects into there, draw up, draw a dotted line from the center line. Where these two hit, I can then bring that and draw that through right here. And that's the same angle. See how I did that? That's back to the roof of the house. Remember I talked about figuring out the roof of the house? It just looks a little bit more confusing because it's in there. And here's the problem, is that all those lines can get a little confusing. That's why it's easier if you have, I would really recommend one of those those pens you buy that have a red, a yellow, the blue ones, and then on the tip, or if you have some various colored pencils. So you can draw a couple trace lines. It gets confusing when you have all those lines in there, and I don't want to, I look at that and it looks like I'm building a crazy house out of toothpicks. And I don't want to scare anybody away, right? But there's a consistency that has to take place there. So look, see how I figured out that bottom? So I'm figuring out that shape drawn through. Look, let me take this line here. I'm going to draw this up. And where that hits that top line, I'm going to then draw that line back through right there. Okay? And then I can recede that back. I can do so I know these are parallel. Connect through there. That's that leg now on the other side. Okay? Now I know where the cylinder height is. So it's supposed to end, that's supposed to end here. So my cylinder height's right about there. This stops right here. So if I come up and draw like this. Now it looks really busy. This is where I can come back to my blue drawing now. So if I turn this off, but watch what I can do really quick. I can come back here, and here's the benefit of using the tracing paper, right? And if I come back here, you go back to my blue I had. You can't see this because I'm drawing under a layer. Just give me a minute here. So now when I turn this off, there, you see how that leg makes sense? Okay? So when I turn off all those brown line sketches I just did to figure that out, okay, you can see that that leg is in the right position. Okay? So that was the most commonly mistaken issue or problem that happened from students over last class is more than half of the class, almost 70% of the class, did not correctly draw through that part of the shape right there. Okay? Now some of you had some, I'm going to call it trickery, some shapes that confused you a little bit. And let me see if I can draw on top of this and show you what I mean by that. Okay? So some of you had stuff like this. Got another level here. Where you had a shape that wasn't lined up with the body. It was coming off. Let me see a good example if I can do this. Problem is I'm getting a little too close to the horizon line there. Let me see if I can do it back here. Some of you had shapes that were coming off the body at like weird angles. Like for example, you'd have, how am I going to do this? Give me a second to think. Okay, so yeah, some of you would have stuff like this. Like that, okay? That shape is coming off of a new vanishing point, which is right there. Boom. It's about right there, okay? I didn't converge my lines that well because I'm doing it freehand. Okay, let me get it sort of locked in a little bit tighter, okay? But then, on the other side, so this shape is doing two things. One, it's coming towards me, and then it's also, well, it has the illusion that it's pitching a little bit, okay? Actually, it's not pitching here. Some people came in and they had a shape that was something, God, let me try to think of a great example. Here's a good example. They had something like this, like a claw, an antler in the front here that was angled down like this. Like this, okay? And then it was sort of hitting the ground. So then they still had the shape here. But then they came over and they couldn't figure out how to draw the shape on the other side. Well, all you have to do is figure out where this intersection point is right here. Do you see this? Where it intersects right there, I just have to draw through and figure out that same shape right there. And then after I do that, I just draw from that same vanishing point. And I can come back over and start to sketch out that same angle of that particular shape. And then to figure out where it ends, I just come over and put a mark right here where it ends. And then if I were to come back and go across here, okay, which it's sort of overlapped in one line, but I could pretty much eyeball it. It's going to end about right in there, okay? Like so, on the other side. So I won't be able to see it in that instance, which is fine, okay? However, though, go back a couple steps there. All right, people had this type of shape extruding forward, and then they would draw it incorrectly, and sometimes that shape wasn't even correct in perspective. So again, how do I check it in perspective, right? Is if I come to the center of it, I drop that center line down, see where that hits the ground plane, and then I need to come back over from VP2 and come across here. Okay, so that leg is actually a little bit too far. That leg should actually end about right there and about right here. Okay, see how I figured that out? Okay, and then if I want to draw that leg on the other side, okay, this is an example of figuring out my proportions. Okay, let me show you what I mean by that. Here's the split in the middle from this shape to this shape, right? On this square shape, if I cross this again one more time, here's the middle of that section, right? This center line right here is almost spliced in thirds of this being split in half. Do you see that? So there's one key shape here split in half. Okay, so this is A, and then A right now is made up of 4 parts. Okay, 1, and then if I cross this, you split that in half. 2, 3, and then 4. And then if I take 4 and split it into thirds, that's where that line connects. So how do I figure out where this is over here? Okay, it was in the first, so here's the center line, right? If I have the center line right here, I know this is in the first section, which means it's going to be in panel number 1 right there. So then if I come over to panel number 1, and if I just split it into thirds real quick, and then if I measure the height back, like so, now I know where that's connecting, right? Now all I have to do is make the lines parallel. So now I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to measure up with my ruler. I'm going to make sure, you guys can't really see this, I'm measuring up, getting the lines to be exactly pretty much parallel. And then come from that corner, I'm going to draw that down, slide over, and get this guy in there. And I'm going to get this guy in there. Now I have to come back and measure to figure out where it hit the ground, right? So I measure, I already know where that hit the ground, and just draw a dotted line. And there it goes. It hits the ground right there. Now I can erase this and then recede this back to their vanishing point. Okay? So if I come back and, hold on, my blue keeps getting lighter and lighter. So if I draw on that a little bit darker, that's how I figure out the placement of that other leg. That's right in there. Okay? All right? You see how that works? I'm just measuring lines. I'm transferring that back to the vanishing points. And at the same time, I'm coming back in there. Okay? And, you know, my ruler, I was a little bit crooked there, but that's fine right now. Okay, but I'm transferring heights back. So if I have that height there and I come over, I figure out that's the same height that's right there. It's the same thing before the feet hit the ground. In order to understand where the feet hit the ground, I have to determine in the beginning where the ground plane is. And one way to determine that is to just drop that little line down there and create a shadow. Okay, so let me do another one for you. All right, let me create a folder, and we'll put all that into one group there. There we go, and I can turn that off. I can turn the grid back on. Okay, all right, so let's do another one here. Let's start with, maybe we'll do something that's a little bit more complicated. All right, let me think for a minute here. I know what I wanted to show you, because some of you weren't able to do the turnaround correctly. And I want to show you a measuring system on how you can determine that. All right. So I'm going to come over here real quick in my side view, and I'm going to sketch in this type of shape right here. A blocky head shape. Maybe a blocky body. I'm going to just do this real simplified. And then I'm going to have maybe a leg here. And I'm going to have a tail, let's say, like this. It comes up at a little bit of an angle. Okay? That's going to be my magnificent insect right there. Okay? From a side view. Now, what's important about this is that if I come in here with red and I do some measurements, and I figure out some variables, and I look at that, oops, I just zoomed in, that, hold on, how did that happen? I changed colors without touching anything. Okay, let's go back to the measuring. Sorry guys, I hit one of these little buttons on the side here on the SMT. So I'm measuring right in here. I don't just measure vertically, but I'm also measuring horizontally as well. Okay, what do I know right now? I know that this shape is almost 1/3. It's very similar to that shape. This is just a little bit smaller back here on the tail. Okay. Also, what do I know? I know the position of the thickness of the head right in there, and I know its relationship above the ground. I know the body dips a little bit more like that, and then the legs come down, and I also have a good idea of what the angle is right here of that tail. And part of that angle of the tail hits right there in that center. Okay? So I can take measurements right here, and now I can apply that to a front view and a reverse view. Okay? So just by looking at that, so the first thing I know, I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to figure out, so the one thing I don't know is the width of all this, right? So, but that's okay. Let me come over here. I'm going to start here with this head shape. Okay? I know that I have this shape here to here, and it's pretty much, there we go. Let me just rough it in real quick. Here we go. Okay? So that's my head shape right there. Okay? Now I'm going to determine the ground plane. How do I determine the ground plane? Look at my drawing right there. That head shape, the distance to the ground is almost the same distance. It's a little bit less. So now I can just take this measurement right here. I can add a little bit more. Add it there and go a little bit less than that distance from here to here. put it there. And now I'm going to just quickly come in here, just because it's easier for me to look at it like this. And I'm going to sketch in just a real rough line like this on the ground plane. Okay, so there, now I see where that shadow is, right, of that box underneath it. Now, look at the back of the body, this section that was right here. Do you see that? What do I know? I know it was a little bit taller than the head. So now I could come over here to my insect and I make it a little bit taller. Okay? And you could get really mathematical with perspective. I just eyeball some of this because I'm just sketching off of a thumbnail. And I think it's just fine, but I know that's a little bit taller. And I also know that this drops a little bit lower right there. So now I can drop this down a little bit lower like this, and I can receive that back. I'm going to draw a couple of dotted lines on here so I can make sure I'm matching the perspective. Drawing through the shape like that. You see that? Okay. Now I know that the thickness, that these are almost identical in terms of thickness. So now I'm going to come back here. Now as it recedes, there's going to be convergence happening, so it's going to get a little bit smaller. So I could pretty much estimate, I can look at that distance from there to there, and I could pretty much estimate that's pretty close to being the same distance right there. That's my third. Now I'm going to construct the rest of the box. Right? Let me get that line in there. Like that, okay? And then now I have the back section. I also have the legs. I know, look at the legs. How high do the legs come up right here? See how high they come up, and I can take a measurement of that. So if I compare that to here, it's almost 1/3 of that. So if I come up and measure this, and go 1, right there, okay, and then it's just over a little bit. So if I come over to about right there, that's going to be that measurement for that leg insertion right there. See that? Now let's do the back leg insertion. It's also not quite at the end. It's a little bit close, but it's the exact same height. So now I can come back here to the end, draw a dotted line, and I know the back leg is going to be about right here. Okay? Now I have a tail. That tail exists in a cube that's slightly bigger now than the back. You see that? It's taller than this. So if I come over here in blue really quick, and I raise up to about here, now I'm going to come back, receive that back to VP1. Okay? I'm going to receive this back in perspective here, matching my perspective here. I know that this distance from here to here, it's similar to thirds, it's just a little bit smaller, so I'm just going to make it a teeny bit smaller here when I draw it. Okay? And now that I draw that little box shape, receive that back to VP1 and get that in there. Now look at the angle. I know that the angle of this tail, so look at the corner of the box. This hits right in the corner, but then it hits before that one does. So I could come in here now and say that would be here to there, like that. And now that I figured that out, then the tail goes this way, hits the end of the box, and comes back and lands right there. There it is. I just figured out the tail. And now I could erase this back part that I don't need. Okay. I could draw through the shape and figure out exactly where this ends. So it would end probably about right there. And then I could come back in and draw that line there. Erase this key shape that it was in. Now I got the tail. Okay, so you see how I'm using those measurements to compare to each other? So now when I go to do the reverse view, if I want to do this on a piece of tracing paper, I could just come back over and I could take those same measurements that I just have and I could just drop them down here on the line and just ask myself, look at that distance. Oops, I thought I switched colors. That if I were to draw a line straight across, oops, I'm trying to do that freehand and it's not working. So to do this in reverse view, I just have to take the same measurements that I already have in front of me. I have to measure up my drawing and make sure the shapes are working in the reverse view. That I know that, let me Command Z that last line. It was a little crooked there. So was that one. I know that this shape distance from here to here is almost identical to that distance. It's pretty much the same in my sketch from a side view. And then I know how to figure out the angle. I know that that distance from there to there is a little bit less. So now all I have to do is switch it and bring those same increments over to the reverse view. Okay? I'm only asking you guys to do 2 views. I told the other advanced students to do, like 3 to 5 variations of insect robots. Okay, they've already done some reverse views for me. So the only thing I'd have to figure out on this now would be the position of the legs. And that I can't tell from my sketch. So what I need to determine, I don't know, I'm just going to quickly draw on this. I don't know if my legs are going to go like this and come out like all the way there, or if they're just going to maybe just come up and do this. I have no idea. I have to determine that now. I can't tell from a side view how far the legs come out. So that's up to me. What I do know is I know how to figure out where they're going to hit the ground, right? Because if I drop a center line down my box like this, and if I receive that center line back right here in perspective, right? Going back, here's the back of the shape, right? Back there, okay? When that center line hits, where was I? Should hit about right there, okay? When that center line hits right there, if I want to figure out where this leg is, what do? I just draw a dotted line this way. Where I hit the center line right there, I drop a dotted line down, and when I hit that bottom line, then I draw a line out like this. So now I know any leg that's, excuse me, ruler was slippage there. So any leg that comes up, if it hits here and ends, I know it's going to end right there, right? Okay? And if the leg doesn't end there, and I want to make it go, let's say I want to make it even higher, say I make it come up here and go way out like that, it's going to end right there. It has to end in the same position because it's the same relationship and perspective. Does that make sense? Any questions on that at all? So I showed you a couple different things now. I showed you how to draw through the shape, which was the most commonly forgotten part of the assignment. Okay, the center line is key in that because I have to understand where the center line is in order to figure out distances. I showed you guys how to figure out the leg on the other side, how it connects through. And then most importantly, then I showed you guys how to figure out where the shadow is on the ground. And once you have that shadow on the ground and you've decided where the height is of that, then that's going to dictate where the legs are landing. So if you want to sketch the shadow in really lightly, that's totally fine. Okay? Let me see if I can pull up something real quick for you. And we can do like a miniature draw over. So this might seem mind-numbing to you because it's just us looking at the perspective, right? So let me just type in MEX. So I just grabbed somebody's assignment. I have no idea whose this is. I'm going to go ahead and put a line over it, and then I'm going to turn off some of these other sketches that I have here. Okay, and then I can just take a look at this in perspective, and I can draw on top of it. And I can just start asking myself some questions. I can see if this guy figured out what he was doing and if it was right in the drawing or not. Okay, so let's start with what we know. What do we know? We always know where the center line is just by looking at the objects. Center line right now is coming this way, dropping down, up, over, comes over, drops there, comes back. And then the distance from here to the ground, 1, 2, it's going to drop right there. And then where these feet are hitting the ground, right here. Okay, that's where the center line is, which means if I receive this back now, that's basically the square in which this character is standing in. That's his key body. Does that make sense? Okay? And what I could do is figure out more of that center line now like this, draw through the shape if I wanted to, figure out where that center line's coming back behind, and I bet you it'll pretty much line up right to about there. See that? So I know that most of the construction on that's pretty solid. Okay. This guy, now this might be a difference in how I move the leg, because this is actually where part of the character design class bombed parts of the turnaround a little bit that we were working on yesterday too. It's the same principle of perspective, right? This arm right here is looking good, and if I draw through to the other side and receive that line back, okay, that little box, it shifts there, and here's the elbow bend, right? On this side, he has the elbow bend, but it's turned in the opposite direction, which means the arms are pivoting a little like this. They're not straight on. If I move my arms out, they're like this, okay? So he has one arm that comes forward, and he hits the ground right here. Okay? The other arm is turned at a little bit of an angle. But do you see how that's correct, though? Because if I look at this line and see where he's hitting the ground, he's just turned at a slight angle, and he's still in the same insertion point right there. So that means the artist that drew that mech, he didn't just draw the mech. You guys are looking at this, and what do you guys see? You see that. You see the rendering on it. And you see all the spicy, nice little details and the highlights, and it makes you look at it and you're like, oh, that's so awesome, I want to do that. And then you go in to do it, and yours ends up looking like a big piece of chewed up bubble gum because your construction's off, and your construction's off because your perspective's off. Okay, so that's a great exercise. You can go through and take a bunch of artists' works. In fact, let's see if we can find somebody's, because I love to do that. That's one of my big quorums about DeviantArt sometimes, is I go into DeviantArt and you find massive problems with people. Oh yes, do you guys know what that is?
Titanfall.
That's Titanfall. That's an org.
Taking a wild stab at it.
That's what I run around in late at night and blow people up with a 40mm grenade launcher. So let's just, I'm trying to see if I can find an example here. That one actually looks pretty good. Most of these might be pretty, here, let's see what we got here. I don't know who this is. Someone's going to be like, oh, send me a letter, hate mail. You took my mech, man. You made fun of me. Not trying to make fun of anybody. Just trying to make sure the perspective.
Learn from their mistakes.
Absolutely. And that's one of the problems that I sort of have sometimes, like I was mentioning before, with some of the artists on certain sites. Some people don't have training, and then they copy other people's work, and there's no construction there. So I'm noticing I have a little bit of concern on this guy right here. Okay? This guy feels pretty good. So here, let me draw on top of it. This guy feels pretty good, because when I drop a center line down him, hold on, it might be a little hard to see that center line. I'll do it in red. So when I drop a center line, and if I were to cut him with a butter knife, he looks like he would probably cut something like that. Okay? And then when I bring that line down, look at where it's hitting, and if I bring a line across, you see that? So that feels pretty solid. The construction there feels pretty good. However, though, I did notice this, is he has like an off, weird tilt going this way. So those thrusters are on a tilt like this. Do you see that? But then these guys are receding that way. There's an issue there with maybe the perspective on what's connecting to what. Okay, so that felt a little wonky to me. This feels pretty straight on, because I can dissect that guy. That feels like his center line. That's his height, and then where I hit, that's the center mass. And if I come over here and I draw a grid, I can figure out exactly where his feet are hitting. See that? He's pretty spot on. Okay? This guy has some issues, though. One of the first issues I noticed was there's a construction. You sense the wonkiness in the middle here? It's not quite, there's not a straight center line on him. So let me show you what I mean. Center line comes here, and if it drops, then the center line goes this way, then it goes that way. See, it's really crooked, okay? Oh, hold on, wrong layer. Well, if I tone this down a little bit, and I come back on top of it, let's go to blue, and take a look at this. this is a little wonky. Okay, this right here should be something more like this. Okay, so he's got off tilts in there that are wrong. And if I bring that center line and drop down, that shell shape is almost like a front view. So that if that cockpit is lined up into here, let's say like this, it should be going upwards like this. And I should have a center line dropping down like that. You see that? That's a construction. Then if I bring part of that center line down, and if I were to draw through the shape right now and figure out, and it ends right there, and figure out where the pelvic area is, then I would be able to drop a line down here and figure out where the ground is. Do you see what's happening there? This leg is now stepping. When I run, so you guys can't see this on the board here, when I run, do I run like this? No, I don't run and step in the middle of my center of axes. I step on the outside. So if this character runs, now that we've figured out where he hits the ground, right, which is right here, and if I come over here and draw a rough elliptical shape around him, and if I drop this center line there, down, across, where should that foot, I can't talk, where should that foot be hitting right now when this guy's running? Anywhere from here to here. Because that's how people run. They don't step to their centers of axes. So that's why this drawing is a little, it's a little warped and bending a little bit. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay? That's how you figure stuff out. That, what I just did really quickly there is just a little bit of base construction. Okay? But by getting that construction in, I could already tell by looking at this guy, as soon as I saw that, hitting that, it's going past. He's like running crooked.
Maybe he's going to fall over.
Well, I was just going to make a comment. That's what happens when people are about to eat crap. When somebody's running and they're about to tumble. I saw it the other night in my son's football game. This kid, Logan, caught the ball and he's running. And just after he caught the ball, he was off balance and I just made a comment. And he's going to eat crap in 2 steps. 1, 2, boom, right down. Not that you know what I noticed is that his leg landed like way off into one side. He had no other support. Okay? So, boom, he's going. When I was a wrestler in high school, the one thing our coach taught us was to look at your opponent, and if you push them, you're pushing them off their center of axes. So what that meant is that if I took somebody, and they're standing like this, and their head's here, okay, their shoulders are here, and if you look at someone, by the way, if you go from their shoulders and go straight down, that's where the feet hit, right? And if I push this guy this way, this guy's going to end up tilted like this. And when he's tilted, you fall over, then you attack, and then you knock your opponent down, right? So, but what I'm getting back to is the principle of drawing and the construction, the form, and how your character needs to relate to the grid plane. So, if this was a student in one of my classes, I'd be like, excellent job with the mech. The detail looks nice. However, there's some major issues with, especially in the center, with the construction that's taking place. And so when you come back, and do you see how wonky that sort of front is? Okay? And part of the reason why it's wonky is he's having an issue drawing this foreshortened. Okay? And the other thing that's weird is even the legs don't quite, even the legs don't quite feel right, because this shape that's right in here should be coming at me and being foreshortened right there. You see that? And then it actually feels like this leg, look, and then look, here's the pelvic, that's the knee, right? What the hell is that? And there. And then that goes into that. See what I'm getting at? There's 2 different sections in there. And so that's where the construction's off. Okay? So that, and then especially, look at the center line. Even if this was going in that direction, this next canopy piece, the center piece here on his chest, would go like this. Like that. Matching up to the angle of that. Okay? So that's why the center line is so important. And that's why if you have, this is where all this sort of ties in, right? Just to add this one little part here, let me turn this off real quick. So when it comes back into perspective, that's why in one of the classes I tell some of my students that if you really want to learn how to draw out of your head very consistently, you need to learn to be able to draw this guy right here, okay? So all this matches up. If I can come over here, and in any pose right now, I can just draw this guy out of my head and go. This is my mannequin. I can even turn his arms, his hips. I can angle his hips at a different angle if I want. I can have him doing a different type of pose. Okay, so when I'm sitting and drawing in my sketchbook, I'm figuring out all these shapes on how the legs work, how I draw through with these shapes, how these are connecting. So I understand where that individual is sitting in a chair. I understand the direction of the center line of that body and how the head connects to the chest and how it comes down to the pelvic area. Okay, there's a center line there. So everything we're doing in perspective, this is how it all translates right back to figure drawing, right? And then I understand that this line, that leg has a thickness in there that's connecting to part of that pelvic bone, right? So if this leg comes towards me, okay, it's going to be foreshortened. There's going to be my knee. Here's going to be the drop of the other leg. It's going to come back down. If his arm is coming down and if it's resting, or excuse me, let's say this arm's resting like this, and then this arm is coming from support, all right? Like that. Okay, so that's the arm coming down. Let's cheat it. Let's say there's a table or something, or a box. I don't know. Get the point, right? So that's someone in figure drawing, right? So am I looking at a model right now? No. Do I need to look at a model? No, just for the details. But I understand that if I draw through the shape, now look at this one. Most common mistake in figure drawing, right? Look at that. If I draw a dotted line over to the side and drop down to that side and figure out that ellipse in there, I understand that, and then that ellipse, that center axis there, now I understand where this other ellipse has to be there because there's going to be a center axis that drops around it like that. Okay? So I'm going to see this right there. And then I'm going to see the arm go like this. This arm's in casual. It's not supporting any weight. So it's going to drop down about there. There's the elbow. And now here's the connection of the forearm. The forearm's going to foreshorten. It's going to hit here, and their hand's going to be in a relaxed position. Like that. Okay? I didn't look at a model. I'm just drawing shapes out of my head. Because when I was younger, I had to draw the mannequin like 1,000 times out of my mind, and I got to the point where I could just draw him in any position. And then when I can draw him in any position, I can think about his shapes. But what's important to me is this, right? That when I understand that, let's go back to center lines, right? If I understand that, this center line, follow all the center lines, become center line crazy. See that? And then that drops and comes this way. And then the center line off the chest comes to the sphere, drops down the sphere. Okay? Center line, there's even like that side axis line, comes this way. See, I have to understand how that shape hits the ground. He's sitting on a cylinder that hits the ground. That knee comes forward and then boom, it anchors to the ground. So if I came in here right now and if I kept doing, hold on a minute. Hit the wrong button. And if I come in here on his knee, let's say his leg is here, and his leg's dropping to right here, and his foot's going this way, is that foot on the ground plane right now? Hell no. Look at that. If I draw through there and draw the other side to that, how about now? There we go. See, now it makes sense. His leg is in a higher position. It has to rest on something. Okay, and part of that is just always drawing through the shape and figuring out. So if I draw that center line, sorry, I did this really quick. That would end about there. That would end about there. So if I erase some of this and I draw through that shape and I figure out where that elliptical center, where that ellipse is, then I could figure out where it ends on the other side, and then I could bring that line out. And even on that, well, his leg might be foreshortening in another direction, but I could even figure out the axis of the leg and find out if it's correct. Now I'm looking at that and I'm like, wait a minute here. Well, from a side view, it's not bad because that leg could still be about there, which isn't bad. It can still be lined up there, and that's not that bad. But the leg might actually be ending more about here and be ending about there, let's say. Might be a little bit higher because it has to be close to the center line of this. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So everything that we're doing here, there's a method to it and a madness. Okay. It's not just where I'm trying to get you guys to think about. It's not just the construction of bugs or insects. In the very end, this is how we draw and how this is the proper understanding of drawing through the shape and what draftsmanship is. And if you get to a point where you can master this and draw on a regular basis, you can draw anything out of your mind, out of your imagination. Okay. So if I wanted it, I was talking to a student the other day, and I said, just draw like 3 ships chasing each other, banking with a city below. And they're like, I wouldn't even know where to start. I'm like, what do you mean you wouldn't know where to start? What's rule number 1? Put in a horizon line and a ground plane, right? After you put in the horizon line and the ground plane, then go in and sketch 3 ships. What are ships in the shape of? Boxes. What are the boxes going to be doing? What do you do on a roller coaster when it banks? I just gave away the answer, but when you're in speed and you're going to turn in your car, or if you've been on a roller coaster, it banks in the turn to absorb part of the weight. If you were on a roller coaster and you went around a turn and it stayed like this, you'd like be thrown out of the roller coaster. The roller coaster has to bank in the turn. So if anyone's ever here had the privilege to go on a plane or like a little jet or something and be flown around, as soon as that plane hits something, it banks. So all I have to do is draw a quick bank, a turn, or take the squares and bank them a little bit in perspective. And all I have to do is understand where they are in relationship to my horizon line. And then I draw the grid plane. And then what are my building shapes in? Boxes. So I draw a bunch of boxes, and I have 3 boxes chasing each other up on the top, all banking. That's it. I figured out the construction. Everything else is detail, drawing on top of the shape, and putting on the icing on the cake. Okay? So anyway, I hope this all made sense to you, because I didn't want some people to think like, why are we drawing insects? And why are we... Well, insects are fun to draw, number 1. But I want you to get used to drawing through the shape, because what you're doing here and applying it. Okay. Now, a couple of you people did some madness in your drawings where you were going through, and not to pick on you, Michelle, but some of you guys, you had some stuff like this. Like you have like a leg on your insect, and then you would have this come to like a point. But then you were cheating, and you're doing this. You're like, wait a minute. That would be thick like that, so that line can't sit on top of that. They can't connect. Does that make sense? Everything has to exist in shape, and you just draw the shape in the correct form, and you'll be fine. So that's where I tell students, if you're putting too much detail, simplify, go back to key primitive shapes, and keep it in that, that arena. So if we come back here, I think that was a pretty cool exercise, drawing over some of those mechs and taking a look at what's correct and what's not correct. Because before any of these guys start this, they've already figured that out. They've already done preliminary sketches. Or they've been drawing long enough that when they're painting, they have another layer where they go back and they check it. Okay? And the secret about this is that when you submit a portfolio, and I'm on the other receiving end, because I'm on a show on my 4 months off out of the year, on let's say summertime, and I get Peter's portfolio at Warner Brothers, or at another company or whatever I'm working on, I noticed it like that because I've been doing it for 17 years or whatever. So I notice when the perspective's off. I notice when the construction's off. And we have an old expression with looking at artwork, which is your worst piece in your portfolio is that best piece you're going to produce for me that day, which means I don't want to deal with your worst piece. I want to deal with your work at its highest level. So if I look through your portfolio and I don't see any hesitations or any mistakes with perspective, I make the comment, this kid knows construction. And we look for weaknesses in books. There are some weaknesses that might be understandable because you might have only drawn 5 environments and maybe your composition's a little bit weak, but that can be fixed. That can be fixed with practice and time. But the most part, the key thing that everybody's looking at in your portfolio, there are two things. One is what we're doing in this class. It's the solid drawing and the construction, the rules of draftsmanship and perspective. Number two would be your design sensibilities. Do you have the ability to not just draw square insects all the time, right? Do you have the ability to get in and become a designer and to start having expressive shape language and make something look visually appealing? Those are the two factors right there. The other stuff comes a little bit later. The rendering, the presentation and stuff, that's a little bit down the line. Everything else starts right here. Okay, so let me end the demo right there, and I can get it rendering, and then I'll post it up on the blog for you. Okay, 1 second. Let me figure out on my Mac here how to do that. All right, Camtasia, stop. And it's not stopping. Now we gotta go here. There it is.